the things I want to really hope the industry does is don't disparage other ways of producing food, because everybody's working their butts off trying to do things right. My mom always said, don't raise yourself by pushing other people down. And I always took that to heart, right? Just you can talk about your benefits without being disparaging to way other systems are, but let's build it together, because especially in food and agriculture, there's fewer and fewer of us every year in it, trying to produce for more and more people on the planet. So let's think about it as we're all playing a part in this thing.
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast, weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and ag-tech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
Vertical Farming Podcast, Season 2, welcome back. If this is your first time listening, I'm positive you're in the right place, as this is the show where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. I'm your host, Harry Duran, and in case you missed last week's episode, I had a really inspiring conversation with Mario Vitalis. He's the founder of New Age Provisions, and he told an inspiring story about how he was able to get started with his container farm and the impact that it's had in his community. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. If you're looking for a greenhouse solution that will suit your specific climate and growing goals, then talk to an expert from Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. Ceres combines passive solar concepts, innovative climate control technologies, and customized grow systems to ensure that their growers are yielding the highest quality product year-round for the lowest operational cost. Visit ceresgreenhousesolutions.com, that's spelled C-E-R-E-S, greenhousesolutions.com to learn more. This week, I get to speak to Dr. John Purcell. He's the CEO of Unfold. John has dedicated his life to helping farmers safely and sustainably grow food using less of the Earth's natural resources. In his new role as president and CEO, John is continuing the same mission to improve the food ecosystem with more sustainable, fresher, and better tasting fruits and vegetables. In this episode, we discussed John's previous work at Bayer and Monsanto, which led to innovations in diverse technologies for important global crops. John opens up about the passion he has for sustainability and the respect he has for farmers, along with a mention of his family ranching operation in Montana. I was fascinated to learn what John picked up from his time working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the highlights from his overall career. We dig into some of the leaders and mentors who have influenced John and how his time at Bayer led to the transition of his current role as CEO of Unfold. We learn a bit about the challenges of growing a startup and building a team, and John reflects on the many segments of vertical farming and where Unfold operates in this landscape. All in all, a fascinating discussion with someone who definitely has his finger on the pulse of what's happening from the world of biogenetics. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. Okay, let's get into this great conversation with John. So, John Purcell, CEO of Unfold, thank you so much for joining us on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Oh, Harry, thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
So given, we love to date stamp these things just as a point in time. We are at November 5th, 2020. I don't know about you, but I haven't been to sleep earlier than 2 a.m. the last 2 nights.
It sort of goes with 2020, though. I mean, this whole year,
yes,
everything, you just kind of go with it because everything, it is what it is. So,
I've been seeing people compiling the list of things that happened in 2020. And when you put that list together, like Kobe Bryant dying, COVID, like the election, and some of these things, you're like, wait, that happened in 2020? I thought that was like last year.
Exactly. I think we're all waiting for January 1st. That's for sure.
Yeah. So just as a check-in for you and your organization and your family, what's been the impact from a COVID perspective?
Well, it's been interesting for me personally, professionally, of course, starting a company with COVID. So hiring people that you've only met by video and conference calls. Family-wise, it's hard because I live in California. My kids are on the East Coast. Although we did make the big drive last month to get to the East Coast, so we're seeing them again. They've entered our pod for the time being.
The safety pod.
The safety pod, right. But we did the COVID test on both ends, so it's just it's hard because you're just used to certain things in life, and you just can't do it. And so you just, like everything, just take it a day at a time and just keep plowing ahead.
Yeah. I was looking at your past education, and I'm curious if you can remember going that far back, when the interest in science started for you.
That far back. Thank you, Harry. I appreciate that, the way you framed it up. So, no, for me, I was one of those kids. I loved being outdoors and science. I love science too, but I love the nature piece. And so for me, that kind of went hand in hand. And so, I just love being active outside, but I also had this, I was always bringing home some animal or another. I lived in DC, actually, right outside DC, but there's woods everywhere. So Rock Creek and all that. So, but I just always had kind of an interest like that. And then as I started in school, when you realize you're pretty good at science and math, it gets easier. And so for me, it was a pretty easy track, actually, to say I'm probably going to do something in the science and math arena.
Is it one of those things? And I'm dating myself because I just turned 50 last month. So I'm thinking back when science labs and all that, and at that time that the kids who took the science weren't the cool kids, and you're like the nerdy kids. And then later on, it's like, okay, now we're the ones who are like starting companies, and it all comes full circle.
Yeah, but I always loved sports too. So I had like two worlds, and so I was like, I was a science nerd, and then on the teams would say, that's the guy he's a nerd, but no, but to me, it was. I always thought it was cool, frankly, and it's funny. My daughter's actually in agriculture communications, and she was laughing. She goes, "Dad, you're in vertical farming. You actually are cool now." I thought that's a great, when you get the stamp approval from a 27-year-old. I said, "All right, I'll take it. I'll take it." So, yeah.
Have you had a discussion with her? Like, what do you think about it is cool to her, or what is it, that it's attractive to her? Because obviously she's in the industry now.
Yeah, and I think for her, because one of the drivers for her to go into agriculture was she has a really firm commitment to sustainability, and she works for a group, Field to Market, that really deals with trying to tell the story of farmers and sustainable practices. So for her, she looks at technology and innovation as enablers of sustainability. And that's something I feel really strongly about. I think sometimes people have this kind of romantic view that we got to go back to the way we used to do things, versus technology and innovation really being an enabler of sustainability. So for me and my daughter, that's something passion we share, that you don't have to look at innovation and technology as an antithesis to how to grow food. It's actually a great enabler to provide the kind of food and especially in the produce world, but all food experience, the way consumers are asking questions, not just about what the food is, but how it was grown, who grew it, et cetera. But I really do think that we've got, we're making progress, people understanding that technology innovation can be a driver for sustainability rather than running counter to sustainability.
When do you think that became important for you, or was that something you were taught, or how you were raised? This idea of sustainability and then the importance of it, because it seems like it's something that's been also now passed on to your daughter.
Well, I think for me, so I grew up. I was born in DC. I'm a native Washingtonian. We do actually exist, but I also spent summers down at my aunt's corn and soybean farm, which was right near the Chesapeake Bay. And growing up anywhere near the Chesapeake Bay, if you come down to this area, you see Save the Bay. Yeah. You still see Save the Bay bumper stickers everywhere, right? So I think the Chesapeake Bay, for all of us who grew up in this area, it's just such a pristine, unique ecosystem that has to be preserved. But it's also, in some ways, kind of a microcosm of the challenges we face, because you have a very robust and growing urban area, the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia corridor, right? Huge population. People need jobs. People need that. You have a lot of agriculture, basically Eastern Shore and the northern neck of Virginia. There's a lot of agriculture in the area. There's a lot of pressures from society. But then you have this amazing natural resource, the Bay, right? And so I think for me, it kind of cements that we got to figure out a way to do this, right? You got to have a balance, because people have to have jobs, people have to have food, but can we do it in a way that growth is not going to destroy something that's absolutely so precious to all of us in this area, and really pretty unique in a global perspective, that is the Chesapeake Bay. So for me, I think that kind of cemented it in my mind that, let's think about how can we do sustainability. But I am a big believer, especially being an ag, any definition of sustainability also has to conclude the economic sustainability for the farmer, because it has to be, you got to figure out the whole equation, right? How do we keep farms a business? How do we keep food being produced? But how do we do it in a way that is able to sustain those kinds of precious ecosystems that we all want to sustain?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So when you graduated from college, you had a stint at the USDA. And I'm wondering what you learned from that perspective, like working in a governmental organization.
Yeah, and for me, it was kind of a unique position at USDA. And I'll back up first, though, Harry, because my graduate work was pretty unique in that my thesis advisor, Dr. Norton, great man, but he actually at that time, this was in the 80s, he had a fledgling kind of biotech company. He was doing corporate research for a very large company, a U.S. company, and then he had his academic lab. And so as a graduate student, it was a pretty amazing environment because in the early 80s, having a biotech is like, really? Yeah, I thought this is really cool. So I kind of went, unlike a lot of graduate students, it's a very academic kind of atmosphere. It was a very robust innovation kind of ecosystem in the lab, which was cool. And so for me, I kind of got the bug that I love science, but I probably love technology more. And what I mean by that is it's the application of the science. It's what is the challenge you're trying to solve? What's the solution you're bringing through your science, right? And so that kind of that's how it kind of for me got me so interested in, okay, how can I apply that? And the laboratory I was in at USDA was actually a lab that was getting funding from corporate funding, because USDA was also, it does and still does great basic research, but it also tries to really address significant challenges for American farmers and ranchers. And so being a USDA made sense to me because it was, I can apply my science, but I can do it in a way that's trying to tackle real world problems. And then what's the technology that's really going to be the enabler?
And then you went on to what was going to end up being your longest stint at a company working at Monsanto. So obviously, there's probably a long enough story. We'd probably need a couple of episodes to dig into everything you learned. But there's something about working at a big company, and I myself worked at JP Morgan Chase. So there's challenges with what you can and can't get done. So I'm wondering, as you think about the arc of your career there, what are some of the highlights?
Yeah, and I think for me, just the transition to Monsanto, it was St. Louis based, right? When you're growing up on the East Coast, you're not thinking, gee, I'm going to move to St. Louis when I grow up, right? It's not even on your radar, right? And so I went out there and I was happy. I loved what I was doing at USDA. I was right outside my hometown of DC. It was like, life's good. My wife was like 7 months pregnant. We're like, oh, we got, grandparents are all there. Everything's grooved, right? And she goes, what is this company? I said, well, they said they want to talk to me. I'm going to go out and see what they're doing. So I flew out to St. Louis. And this was in the 80s, right? So I went there and they had built this purpose-built genomics facility in the 80s. I'm going, are you kidding me? I looked at all the incredible science, technology, what they were putting into plant science. And I said, man, these dudes are playing a different game. I mean, this is like at a scale I had never seen for biology. But they had this vision that was, and it was a very chemical-based company. I mean, we were a small unit, the biotechnology unit at Monsanto at that point. But they had this vision that biology was going to be the driver. There were always going to be, there still is, a role for chemistry, for pesticides, et cetera. But biology was really going to be the next big thing, the next revolution in agriculture. So I bought a St. Louis Cardinal hat, and my wife and I moved. It's 7.5 months pregnant. Actually, we moved right after my son was born. He was born in DC, but we moved out to St. Louis after that. But for me, it was just this vision that we were going to do stuff from really trying to take full advantage of the modern biology, of all the tools, the genomics, the genetics. And remember, at the same time, of course, there was this massive effort on the Human Genome Project, right? And so you had being driven, the biology revolution being driven by pharmaceutical and by medicinal uses, but agriculture was running a parallel track. And so to be a part of something like that was really exciting. And for me, those were amazing years because it wasn't just trying to find a new product or something. It was really trying to figure out a better way for farmers to grow their crops and to be part of something that's so fundamental that, we're going to be able to have a seed that protects itself from insects. That's what I was an insect biochemist, so that's what I worked on, was how can we have that seed, and then looking, well, how does nature do it? And that's when we found. This was known. Bacillus thuringiensis, BT, it's been used decades, 50, 60 years in organic agriculture, right? We said, well, what if we take the gene from there, have the plant produce that same protein that controls the pest? But some of the learnings from that was definitely think big. Don't think about what's the current market look like. What's the current? Think what would be optimal. What are ways to kind of bust through the paradigms? And as it turned out, became a multi-billion-dollar industry from a pretty small group. I credit Dr. Rob Fraley, who headed the technology organization for many years from Monsanto, but he taught me another thing that was really important. He said, and I really appreciate it, he said, don't fall in love with the science, fall in love with the solution. And I think what I always remembered to that was, it's great to have incredible science, and we need incredible science, but if you're using that science now to come up with a solution that actually tackles a really big challenge we have, Harry, that's just so rewarding. You really feel like, oh my gosh, this is not this, this little great science project over here that everybody's going, what the heck is he working on? This is something that really solves real world problems. And I think for me, that was some of the big lessons from Monsanto was, don't kind of put the blinders on trying to solve problems by the way, just finding a new way that's kind of consistent with the way people do it. Think bigger. Think what's the real challenge, and then broaden your sphere on the solutions. But also that focus on absolutely think about do world-class science, but let's think about the solutions and let's tackle really big challenges, which is what we tried to do.
I think it's a Benjamin Franklin quote that I'm probably going to butcher, but it's around the idea, it's probably Einstein. It says, you can't solve a problem using the same logic that created it in order to find a solution, or something, something to that effect.
No, that's right. That's right. It's a very good quote. I'm going to look it up, see what actually what the quote is. No, it's good though.
Yeah. Fact check.
No, I don't mean by fact check. I just want to put my own personal kind of piggy bank here on.
I'll find it.
Cool.
You mentioned something. You touched on one example, but on the topic of leadership, and as we get to what your current role is, were there any other leaders or mentors that you had a relationship with in Monsanto that were critical, or that you think of now, whose lessons you're currently applying?
Yeah, and I think one of the leaders I had that taught me something I always remembered is you're going to be leading teams, and we were growing so rapidly because the biotechnology piece became the company. And so we went from this small research unit that then actually became the company, which was a very traditional chemical company that really morphed into a biology company. But one of the things one of my former managers said, and I always appreciate it, says, even though you're leading the team, make sure you have a piece that is yours, that you're actually doing too. So you're not just leading leaders, you have a piece of it that they're seeing your contributions as well. And I really took that to heart. And as my team grew, and I finally, they had a little ceremony when they took the pipette man away from me, the way you actually dispense things in the laboratory. And so they said, you're never coming to this bench. You just can't do it anymore. So they had a little ceremony, play a little music, took away my ceremony. It's like that old Western, they took the things off the kind of brand, whatever it's called. Yeah. Anyway, but I always tried to stay so that I actually had work of my own. So not just leading leaders, but there was a piece of our organization, of our goals that I was going to personally be very vested in, so that I'm not just seen as somebody that's leading all these leaders, but we all have pieces that we're going to own, and we're going to do the work themselves. I think it gets you a lot of respect. The other piece I learned was, don't stay just in the leadership bubble. Get out to the farms, get out to the customers, get out. Because where it happens is on the farm, right? And so if you're not out there, mud on the boots, we call it, right? And so if you're not out there really seeing what's happening and seeing what challenges those farmers face, how the heck are you going to come up with a solution if you haven't walked their fields or their greenhouses or glass houses or their vertical farm and say, okay, let's really talk about what solutions you really need.
What were those conversations like, John? Like being on the ground, getting those boots muddy, as you say?
Oh no, I love it. I love it because the thing is, you learn so darn much, and it's like the respect I have for farmers and ranchers, because what I always love about is they're so good at boiling it down to the absolute essence of what they really need, and they're very honest with you, which I like to be honest with people too. You know where you stand, you know what they actually need. And I think the other thing that's been such a lesson for me is the commitment that you just don't meet a farmer or rancher who doesn't share that same commitment from a sustainability standpoint. I mean, this isn't just about growing a crop or growing or raising an animal,
Yeah.
but it's about they want it not just for now or not for the season. They want it for this decade, they're for their family to take
Generations. Yeah.
generations, right? And I know my brother and I have a ranch up in Montana. He runs it full time, and I just love it because he has that same energy around. He's not just going to do it; he's going to do it right. And I think you just don't meet too many farmers or ranchers who aren't really trying to produce a crop. Of course, they want to, they've got to be economically viable, but they're also thinking about how can I do this better? How can I improve my operations? And they're constantly challenging themselves to do that. And sustainability is top of mind for virtually all of them because it's their land, their water. They're, like you said, generational,
Yeah.
right? They want it to be there for their kids and their grandkids, et cetera. So
It reminds me of that. Someone obviously started a company with this concept, but the Native American idea of 7 generations, like the work that you do has repercussions and echoes going forward 7 generations. So if we all thought about how we conducted our business that way, I think the world would be a better place.
yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
So talk a little bit about the impact and influence of Bayer.
I think it was one of those for we had a very successful run at Monsanto. Bayer is a very reputable and very highly respected corporation, and for Bayer, I think the opportunity to really, even though they had seed companies, I think they saw where the Monsanto expertise, it was a pretty cool resource as far as the genetics knowledge, the biology knowledge, the seed company knowledge. And so for Bayer, I really enjoyed my time at Bayer. I was there a couple of years after the acquisition. Unfortunately, I was heading vegetable R&D for Monsanto, and then Bayer offered me the very, very similar role. So it's a pretty easy transition, actually. And because the other thing that worked with it was the fundamentals and sort of the core value systems of these companies are very similar, which is about innovation, about technology, but also trying to provide sustainable solutions in the marketplace. So that made the transition fairly straightforward, actually.
So naturally, their part in the creation of Unfold is what led to where you are now. So what were those early conversations like in terms of you being considered for the position, and how long did that process take? I'm always curious about the origin story of how people end up in these leadership roles, especially for new ventures, because I imagine there's a lot of eyes, a lot of money being invested in this. So deciding who is the right person for that position, I think is a decision that people investing in it don't take lightly.
No, exactly. But I think for when I was with Bayer, we were trying to work to develop new solutions, seed solutions, and digital solutions for vertical farms within the Bayer Vegetable R&D group. But it's challenging because there were we had so many existing markets, the open field and greenhouse and glass house. So you try to carve out this smaller group with an emerging sector. You always got to feed the beast, right? And so it's like you're constantly saying, well, this is the current business, we got to get products for that. So we always had a challenge there. And that's when the idea kind of came, maybe this is better because of the unique nature of the vertical farm, that creating a separate dedicated entity would be the way to go. And so, I was fully supportive of that. And then they asked me, would you be interested? And so I threw my hat in the ring. And it was interesting process, I'll say, going through being the selection process. Because like you say, when people are putting real money down, and both Bayer and Tomasic are involved in this, it's like, yeah, they want to make sure that, especially for me, a lot of the questions, frankly, were around, can you really do this? You've been in big ag for a while. You've had it. I mean, I had a big group, 800 plus people, reporting to me in vegetable R&D. I love, and they said, we've seen you talk 100 times. I said, you always say you have the best job in the world. Why are you saying you want this job now? I said, well, I did have the best job in the world, but this job's even better, right? But I said, because fundamentally it's about helping people grow really delicious produce. I said this, and healthy produce, et cetera. So I said, yeah. And the other thing that really, I think one of the big question marks that was kept coming up during the interview process was around what really drives you, and that's when some of the things I was telling you. It's really about the solution side of things and that innovation side. And one of the things I always tried to do through my times both at Monsanto and Bayer was stay on the cutting edge piece. We're always working on the latest stuff, and we were fortunate that both Monsanto and Bayer Innovation is their enabler, right? So, but I think for me, I had a real interest in vertical farms. I really see it as a significant player for the produce industry, and frankly, personally, I've accomplished a lot. I got no complaint. I've been all around the world. I've headed big groups. I've had tremendous opportunities and experiences. But one experience I never had was heading a startup. And so it's like, let's go for it. So I threw my hat in the ring, made it through the interview process, and here we are. And it's been really cool. But it's a different world. There's no question. You don't have 800 people behind you helping you out, right? It's like it's just a few of you trying to figure it out. But it's a fun world though, Harry. It really is.
Thinking about the challenges with growing a startup and building a team, how did you go about thinking what the component or the proportion of skill sets you would need to build that team? Like how many, obviously scientists and data science and marketing and you've got all the departments, and you have to strike that fine balance in order to find which is the right team that I can trust and that can get us to where we need to and to execute on what I imagine Bayer's expecting. How do you think about that as you're building a team? I'm always fascinated about that from a startup perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you got to be really clear about is what are the things that have to happen in the next, especially the next 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, et cetera. What is, when it comes to the time of really looking at where is the company, what is it you have to have established? And for me, that meant we had to get our R&D organization set up. We are thinking about commercial roles and all that. We're adding a few, but the bulk of our team is going to be, the biologists, the breeders, but then of course, because it's vertical, the engineers. And then I'm glad you said data science. I think one of the biggest, coolest things that's happened in agriculture over the last 10 years or so is this confluence of the digital world and the biology world. I call it Silicon Valley meets Salinas Valley. I mean, it's really awesome because it really is taking advantage of the amazing progress that's been happening, in a digital world, and then applying it to how do you grow a crop. And I think so. We're going to have a heavy dose of that. So our team is really putting together with folks that have those kind of backgrounds. The biology, the produce background. But our VP of product, Mickey, she's terrific. Mickey Seibel, she came in from that whole Silicon Valley world. So through eBay and Deliv and those kinds of things. And she heads up product for us. And she's been terrific because she understands that whole digital platform, that whole, how do we think about the software engineering piece and all that? So that gives us a huge leg up. And then we're bringing in other folks who came in from more traditional produce backgrounds, which is important too. But it's fun to put together the team, and I think we got some really great leaders coming in, and then we'll build the teams as we move forward once we have the leadership team in place.
What's interesting about that is this mix that you have mentioned and touched upon about the need for strong background in data science. I've worked, in business intelligence implementation, so I understand there's a lot of moving parts. I've had a couple of great conversations with David Farquhar of Intelligent Growth Solutions, IGS. So, they understand the challenges. I just had a conversation yesterday with Eddie Badrina. He's the new CEO at Eden Green, and he comes from a marketing background. And he talks about this idea of understanding product market fit, which, if you're coming from, the ag world, you're focused on delivering that from an agricultural perspective, but then understanding there are some challenges if you want to succeed, that you have to understand the digital world as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's so many moving parts and so many things to measure too, which I think was fascinating as well for me. Understanding, I had a chat with for season 2 with Tobias Pegg from Square Roots, and again talking about he comes from the software world as well. So there's so many things to measure, and I think that's what a lot of people who are getting into vertical farming may not realize is there's a lot of variables to control, but on the flip side, also a lot of variables to measure, and to the extent that you can do that and have success with that means controls your ability to incrementally improve.
No, it's exactly right. And I think what's cool about, and one of the reasons why we've had some really great conversations with so many players that are actually operating the vertical farm production facilities, is the missing ingredient's been genetics. It's really been the biology side of things, and I think the fact that they've done an amazing job of building these production facilities and are able to control the environmental parameters so exquisitely, right? And having the kinds of systems in place and the robotics, automation, the environmental control systems in place. And they've also, I think, have some great technology. And this is bridging between the ag piece and that to measure what's happening at the plant level. The sensors, the probes. So you have the ability to control the environment. You have the ability to measure then how the plant responds to that. We're going to be able to come in now at the earlier stage and say, what are the genetic elements that allow that plant to respond most effectively to that environment that you're controlling? So when I think about those three digital pieces, controlling the environment, I think they're in great shape. They really know how to do that quite well. Understanding then what's happening at the plant level, good progress, but I think more to come and more coming in from the ag side. But now understanding at the genetic level and using digital means, we talk a lot about predictive breeding, where you're not just testing and trialing things, you're actually understanding well enough about the genes within that plant to be able to make predictions on here are the crosses you need to make, here's the kind of genetic breeding strategies you need to do that. And I think you put those three kind of digital packages together, it's going to be a really cool future for vertical farming.
How do you, for folks that are new to the space and seeing it from afar, they see only because of the head start, you see a lot in the news about what Plenty is doing, what AeroFarms is doing. And I'm wondering, when you think about explaining to folks how Unfold wants to differentiate themselves. You did mention the focus on genetics, and I don't know that as many companies are doing that. But when you think about the markets you want to play in, where specifically in vertical farming, in indoor ag tech, you want to be seen as a leader, how do you explain that to folks who are trying to understand this a little bit better?
Yeah, and I think that's really a key differentiator, because for most, a lot of the companies, are great companies who have established and are doing a great job already, producing crop. We want to be the seed provider of choice, because right now, what they're doing is they're going out looking at seed companies and buying it from Bayer and other very reputable seed companies. I think what's going to be different is now we're going to be developing varieties specifically for vertical farms. A lot of the materials that are being grown were developed for other purposes, and then you basically test it and see, does it work? Versus we're going to have our own R&D vertical farm facility where we're actually going to be developing the genetics specifically for vertical farms. So I think that's the big difference. We're not going to be the produce. You're not going to be the producer of that produce. We're going to be the raw ingredient, the seed that goes into all these vertical farms. So all those companies you mentioned, I want to sell seed to all of them. So I want to be their preferred supplier. So we're at the front end of this thing, which is the way, one thing you got to recognize, Harry, is you look at other production systems, whether it be open field or greenhouse or glass house. For all those, you have dedicated. If you're at Bayer, if you're at one of the big seed companies, you have dedicated programs. You're not just taking whatever and seeing where it works. You have programs that are defined by what are the needs for that specific market, and you hone the genetics for that. What's been missing in vertical, and I've been giving talks at Vertical Farming Conference the last couple of years, is where's your genetics coming from? Where is that, those seeds that have been specifically developed for vertical, which is why I got to tell you, the response has been great. We've had conversations with so many of the companies, many of them you just mentioned, about, how can we help? How can we provide a solution that'll make your make your business more successful? And that's what we're about, making them successful.
How much of what experience not only Bayer but also Temasek brings to Unfold is important for you to lean on? I know I read something that because of Temasek's role being closely linked to what's happening in Singapore, are there lessons in what's been done earlier that you can build upon there? Yeah,
and I think one of the things was really great. Let me talk about Temasek first. I think they, one of the great things about Temasek is they're not just, they're a very large investment firm, with many assets that they're investing in companies around the world. But the other thing I think is really impressive about them is they're true thought leaders. They really want to participate in markets and with companies that they think will better the human condition, if you will, globally. So they really look for those opportunities for investing in those kinds of things that will make a difference. And that's cool. And I think it's really cool when you go visit them in Singapore. It's real. A lot of people have stuff like this on the website. When you go there, That's what they talk about, and that's how they think about their investment portfolio. And of course, they have incredible network and relationships, and in Singapore and Asia, but really globally because they make their investments globally. But I do really appreciate their thought leadership. For Bayer, it's a technology company, it's an ag company, and one of the really attractive parts of the way our company is structured is we have a license to the Bayer germplasm, and so we're not going to have to figure out how do we get all these seeds. We have the ability to take advantage of and I know I'm biased. I headed R&D there, of course, but arguably they have one of the best seed collections in the world. We're going to be able to take advantage of that and then use that genetics to really develop the varieties for vertical farming. But that license is huge because that really is the enabler. And for any startup to be able to have that kind of technology base to build upon is just terrific. So for me, that's what got me excited. I mean, obviously they would greatly appreciate the funding from Bayer and Temasek, but the license and the ability to take advantage of that Bayer germplasm is huge because now we have a huge leg up and we'll have the exclusive rights to that for vertical farming. Bayer is going to continue, in for open field, greenhouse, and glasshouse. We're going to be the engine for the vertical farming sector.
One of the things I thought was interesting was Temasek mentioning their 30 by 30 policy goals is to have 30% of the city's nutritional needs sourced domestically by 2030, which would be up, I think it's 10% from where they are today. So are those, do you think about goals like that as you think about where you want to be, in 5 years, 10 years from now?
Well, yeah. And I think that's why when you look at countries like Singapore, it's very aspirational. I think it's less than 10% of the food they consume is actually grown domestically right now, right? And they're produced domestically. So, basically tripling it in 10 years. But what they have going for them is it's a very high tech kind of country as far as the knowledge base. They have capital, and I think they look at vertical as one of the tickets to actually being able to grow their own food, right? Because they don't have a lot of arable land. And so how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
And there are other countries too in that same situation. If you look at where some of the largest vertical farms are being manufactured, the Middle East, right? Same kind of situation. You have high capital reserves, a lot of technology, very savvy from electronics and all that. But they don't have, they have land, but it's all desert and it's very expensive to grow. So vertical again fits in very well there. So when I think about kind of the market sectors, there's no question those countries who are looking to improving their self-sufficiency from a food perspective. And Singapore is a classic example. And that 30 by 30 is a really cool thing for the country to aspire to. But that's definitely one sector is those countries that are going to commit to vertical in a big way because they see that as one way to increase their domestic food production. And, with all the geopolitical challenges around the world, and of course, COVID really put a spotlight on this is, you got to think about your supply chain, see where food's coming from, et cetera. So the more the countries can do and what are the technologies that fit best, and countries like Singapore and the Middle East see vertical farming as a definitely critical element to driving their own domestic production.
A bit of education for the listener. The term germplasm, you want to define that and educate people a little bit on this? Just
think of it. I'm sorry. Just think about the seeds, right? The seeds. Sorry, germplasm. Germplasm basically is a general term for. It's basically the genetics within the seed. So when you go and if you're a backyard gardener, you pick out and there's certain varieties you like. I like that one. I like that because you knew it worked well for you before. That collection of all those seeds is a germplasm. Sorry, some jargon there, but that's what it is. Yeah.
No, it's okay. No, sometimes it's helpful, and especially in this industry, there's a lot of terms that most people in the industry will be familiar with. But I think, especially since you're focused on seeds, I think that's the key. I think some people forget, and I remember in some of my earlier conversations, I was thinking, okay, you're using seeds that were developed for outdoor farming, but now there's a bunch of different challenges that you have, and how do you create and have crops that are conducive to being grown indoors, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, and I will say this here. One of the huge advantages we're going to have, frankly, from a breeding perspective is a lot of the time that you spend and a lot of the resources to have that seed that works well in an open field, for example, is to build in resistances to diseases or to pests, or to build in resistances to abiotic stresses, temperature ranges, very different, weather conditions from climate, from rain or precipitation, et cetera. So you have to have seed that withstands all of this variability from an environmental perspective. There's a classic equation in breeding, basically G by E. It's a genotype by the environment. well, you're controlling that environment. So now you can really, really focus on the genetics, and you can focus on, you don't have to worry about a lot of things that you normally have to worry about when you think about breeding that seed. And that's really cool, because now you can really think about what's most important at the consumer level. How do you get that great taste, that fresh? How do you get, the kind of sensory experience that consumers want? And then also you can focus on the kind of agronomic or the kind of growing parameters that are important for vertical farms. How the plant responds to light, the architecture of the plant so it's amenable to vertical farm. Uniformity, so the crop all matures at the same point, because many vertical farms use robotic harvesting, right? So you can really hone in on, here are the kinds of characteristics both at the grower level and at the consumer level. And there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to worry about, which from a from a breeding standpoint is great, because the environment's being controlled for you. And that's really one of the advantages, because the environment is being controlled. You really do have a very consistent quality standard every day of the year. And that to me is tremendous.
How do you think about the types? Obviously, there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of varieties that you could go after and decide like where you want to focus your time and first. But given the environment you're working in, how do you think about what crops you do want to focus on for this first round? Is it, because obviously everyone's leafy greens is everything when we get started, and people moving into strawberries and other crops. But how do you and the team think about where you want to focus the bulk of that research time in these early months?
Yeah, so we've got 5 crops that we've chosen, and we're starting with 2 leafy, lettuce and spinach, which are obvious ones. Because that, as you say, that really is where the vast majority of the market is right now. It's the lettuce, the spinaches, it's microgreens, it's some herbs and things. I'm really convinced that in order for vertical to really grow to its true potential, it has to make the leap to fruiting crops. Yeah. It's a really cool industry. It's seen growth and all this, but to really grow to the expectations that a lot of people have, that's where our next 3 crops that we're going to have are tomato, pepper, and cucumber. And because there's a reason why glasshouse growers, high-tech glasshouse especially, focus on tomato, pepper, cucumber. They're highly differentiatable. There's consumer traits. Sensory is king when they get to those crops. And so vertical, I am convinced vertical has to make that leap. And we are really hopeful that we'll be the provider of the seed that allows them to do that, because I think they're high value crops, and they're also ones that are incredibly valuable from a consumer perspective, but also the kinds of characteristics consumers look for in those crops are amenable to having that very hyper local kind of production, fresh product, because people love, it's nothing better than a great tomato popping in your mouth. Wow, that tastes great.
Yeah.
And when you produce it locally,
cucumber salad.
Yeah, cucumber salad, right? All these kind, those are the kinds of things that resonate. You can't survive on leafies alone. You got to have the whole spectrum of crops. So tomato, pepper, cucumber will be the next 3 for us. But you're right, berries is another one that's an obvious one, because flavor again is so, and people love when they taste right. Oh man, they taste great, right? And then the others is like, that's not quite there.
I think what a lot of people, and what I've noticed as a common trend is, I think it's education, because people they're used to going to the supermarket and not understanding how much that lettuce has had to travel to get to their plate, and how much flavor is lost along the process. And I think having the closer, times and connection to like when it's picked and to the time it actually appears on your plate makes a huge difference in flavor. I may be speaking for you already, but I think as you think about working at the gene level, flavor is probably a very, very key component, which is you already have because of accessibility to the crop, but I think that's something that's important as well.
No, absolutely. And you've hit a really key thing, because anytime you can shave days off of how long it takes to get to the store and then to the consumer, that's huge, right? And so I think because you're automatically getting something that's fresher, and it tastes better. And I will say, of course, living in California, the growers do an amazing job. I mean, considering how much the produce is produced in California that ends up in New York, in New England, and around because that's the only place where you can have that kind of level of production, and that's going to continue. But the more we can start to build these local solutions in, with vertical being part of that, it's just going to provide a different flavor experience, because you're taking thousands of miles and days off of the time it takes. And that goes all the way back to, well, when do you have to harvest it? How long do you have to ship it? How do you have to ship it? There's a lot of considerations that are taken out of the equation. And I think that's one of the advantages of vertical, is produce it where people live. And then you're gonna have a better sensory experience, a better flavor profile.
I know it's hard to think about things that we didn't see coming, and COVID definitely falls into that category, but how do you think about any challenges that might be coming up for you that could be unforeseen, and how do you as a leader prepare for things like that of that nature?
Yeah, that's always the trick, isn't it? Yeah, because you map out, and everybody has their kind of their strategy sessions going out 1, 2, 3, 5 years. But I always find usually after a year, especially when you got 3 or 4 years, it's like, okay, let's let's rethink it, because you never know. But I think it goes both ways though. I mean, some of it there's roadblocks that come up, but others is there's enablers. I mean, look at vertical farming. Somebody put out a great graph that has the price of LED lights and then the number of vertical farms. And it's like, yep, there's the curve, right? And so there's technological advances that you may not foresee. And I think that's one of the things you try to do as a scientist is really put yourself in that, because your breeding timelines can be 3, 4, 5 years. So you have to be projecting out, not what the market is now, but what the market's going to be. But now that's the trick, right? But I do think I encourage, my leadership always, let's think both directions. What are the things that can be really a derailer, but then what might happen from an enabling standpoint that just makes our life a heck of a lot easier?
I always keep in mind that Mike Tyson quote that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
He's got good experience in that. So that's another good quote. Yeah.
What's a hard question you've had to ask yourself recently?
I think one of it is, and it's getting better now that we're adding people on the team, but I got to say the first month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, when literally it was me and one Nikki we brought in early, we were doing everything. I mean, literally everything. And it was funny because we actually talked about, because a number of companies do a number of months in a stealth mode to kind of put together things before you really, and we had a very short stealth period. But I do see why companies do that now, because it's like you're deluged. I mean, it's like crazy how many people want to talk to you, and you want to do it because you want to be out there talking, but then you're also trying to build a company, right? And so when I think about is this nuts? We're doing all this and we're having a million conversations every day too. But it's an adrenaline rush. I mean, it is fun. You would do it, but I do think it's getting a little easier now that we're adding more people. We're getting more leadership team together to share that load. But I got to tell you, the first when we were doing so much media and so much customer stuff, and everybody they were juiced about there's a genetics company now in vertical. So all the companies, we were talking to all of them and they were excited and we're excited. It's like, it's only the two of us. So give us a few weeks here before we can actually give you something that actually has value. But that was the oh my gosh, what am I doing? But it's definitely getting better.
What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Something I've changed my mind about. I think something I've really tried to do is don't be judgmental. I think and I think for me, maybe part of it is just the current political situation where everything is just so. Just so divided in two. And I just I challenge myself to not react quickly to, they're so, versus, all right, let's really have a conversation. And so for me, that's going to change my mind is give myself the permission and hopefully you'll get people invited in to, and have a real conversation because, oh my gosh, it's so lacking these days. I mean, where everything is just, so black and white and right and wrong and, versus, and it's really sad because we're better than that, and so that's something I'm trying to change my course is don't react, think about it and think about what if you had the conversation with the person, maybe it's not what you think it is. Right. And so, hope for 2021.
There's this idea of disagreeing without being disagreeable.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm trying to challenge myself to be a better person that way. And I do think COVID, we've all had lots of times to reflect, right? Which is actually a good part of it, But let's reflect on how we conduct ourselves.
And I think we find that there's, at the end of the day, there's more that binds us together that we have in common that divides us. It's easy to get into one of these arguments online, faceless. You don't know who. You're just going to tweet back and forth at somebody or send an email. But if you put the two people in the room, you'll find that my initial thought would be like, how's your family doing? Like, how are you doing? Like, we're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to make the most of our time here on this planet. So I think
Yeah.
To your point, just the more we can do more of that, the better.
No, I agree, Harry, and even in agriculture, because of course coming through Monsanto, right, where there were venues that were like, oh my, it's so heated. But then if you have the opportunity to really talk, and you realize, well, actually, they're thinking about sustainability. They're thinking about how do we grow
Yeah.
things better way. Oh,
Yeah.
let's talk about how can we build on that, right? There is a core value
Yeah.
that we actually both share, even though we may not recognize it from where we might, what organization they're in and what organization I'm in. But then you start talking, you realize,
Yeah.
actually, we actually believe in a lot of the same things. We're just thinking there's a different way to get there, right? And so, but if you don't have the conversation, you'll never get to that point. But
that's true. So as we wrap up, John, as you think about what's coming up, what has you excited about vertical farming? And it could be related to what you're working on Unfold, or just in general about the industry.
Oh, I think any time we can introduce new ways to really provide what consumers are looking for. In the case of having hyper local, fresh, good tasting, and with some good sustainability attributes, that's a really cool thing for agriculture. And I think, back to the point we were just talking about, one of the things I want to really hope the industry does is don't disparage other ways of producing food, because everybody's working their butts off trying to do things right. You don't. My mom always said, "Don't raise yourself by pushing other people down." And I always took that to heart, right? Just you can talk about your benefits without being disparaging to way other systems are, but let's build it together, because especially in food and agriculture, there's fewer and fewer of us every year in it, trying to produce for more and more people on the planet. So let's think about it as we're all playing a part in this thing. And but for me, what's exciting is I think vertical is, I think about that kind of spectrum of technologies from open field to net house to greenhouse to glass house. This is just the next evolution of it, where now a glasshouse grower does a lot to control environment, but vertical really does pretty much control all the environmental attributes. Mm-hmm. And that's really cool to be able to provide, a production system that really has high quality, but also has some great sustainability attributes as well. And that's a fun industry to be in. It's cool when my daughter tells me I'm cool.
I think now you're cool. Your daughter says you're cool.
That's right. Hey, I made it now, man. That's right. What for a dad? What's better than that? Right? Your 27-year-old daughter said you're cool. It's like, yeah.
Hashtag vertical farming.
Yeah, exactly.
What's interesting is also these opportunities, because people are talking about like these loss of jobs now, but there's now these new industries and these new pathways that are being created for people so that they can transition into this new generation of jobs. And I think that holds a lot of promise.
I'm really glad you raised it here, because I think this other cool part I'm really excited about. And you think a lot about legacy, as you get up in your career, and I'm a decade beyond you. But I think the way that some of the cool things with the digital footprint now in agriculture, and things like the robotics and the automation, all the digital platforms, vertical farming, we're bringing in a whole new generation of people who are now interested in producing food that didn't come like me, came through an ag kind of background. Yeah. They're all coming from all different backgrounds, but they're sharing that passion for let's figure out a better way to grow food. And that's really cool to see the different disciplines, the different kind of backgrounds people are having now that are plugging into food production, which is awesome.
That's very good. Well, John, I want to thank you for taking the time to jump on this chat. It's really interesting to hear your backstory, and I think it's going to be inspirational for people, because there's many different paths, and I think on this podcast, what's been the common thread is that there's no one road that leads to a job in vertical farming. Yeah, and which is really great. And I think when people hear your story as well, so I want to appreciate you for telling the story. And I think people will be closely watching what's happening with Unfold, because what you're doing coming in essentially at the DNA level, with seeds, I think is going to be exciting to watch. So best of luck with what you're doing.
Hey, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, Harry. Fantastic.
And so unfold.ag is the website. Any other links that would be helpful for listeners who want to learn more?
Just follow us. And we're on Instagram as well. And so check us out on LinkedIn as well. So, yeah.
And we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes as well. I want to appreciate it. You taking the time again. Thanks, John.
Great. Thank you.
So thanks again to John for sharing that inspiring story. It's always fascinating to hear how some of these bigger companies and some of these new mergers are creating technologies and solutions for the vertical farming industry, and it seems to be changing constantly every week. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to get a sneak peek inside. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Series Greenhouse Solutions. Ceres is creating sustainable growing environments by combining smart design, innovative technology, and dynamic partnerships. Learn more at ceresgs.com. That's CERESGS.com. If you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. We'll be sure to read them out on future episodes. Until we meet again next week, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.